Hello, it's Craig here with a breakdown for Colossal Weapons, which is a very interesting category as it encompasses many weapon types. They basically put Colossal Swords as a category of its own and place stuff like Colossal Hammers, Axes, and Halberds alongside other unique Colossal weapons all into this category. This is why, for example, you can see two main different poise damage of Colossal weapons, where all the hammer types have a higher poise damage. It is also quite evident from the type of physical damage they're dealing. An interesting point worthy of a note is the Fallingstar Beastjaw is actually a hammer type Colossal weapon that deals pierce damage, which is relevant for PvP. These weapons, although of different types, ends up sharing many of the same attack IDs, which means that they share the same attack animations. You can see from the one-handed and two-handed light attack animations that they all have the same attack, even though you might expect otherwise. Here is a quick demonstration. Let's take a quick look at the different movesets of the Colossal weapons. This is the normal heavy and charged heavy attack of Colossal weapons. This is the heavy and charged heavy attack of Golem's Halberd. This is the heavy and charged heavy attack of Prelate's Infernal Crozier. This is the heavy and charged heavy attack of the Greatclaw. This is the heavy and charged heavy attack of Ghiza's Wheel. This is the heavy and charged heavy attack of Giant Crusher. It does look a lot like Lion's Claw, doesn't it? Take another look. This is Lion's Claw. And this is the heavy attack. While there are two different attack IDs for the guard counter, the two guard counters have the same data. There is probably a slight difference in animation somewhere, but they're basically the same attack. Next, let us take a look at the lengths of the Colossal weapons. You probably guessed that the Fallingstar Beastjaw is by far the longest Colossal weapon. The Axe-type Colossal weapons are generally the shortest, which honestly makes them even shittier than they already are. Finally, let us take a look at the different AR of the Colossal weapons and draw some conclusions, starting with the unique Colossal weapons. Let's start with the Greatclaw. The Golden Land weapon art that comes with this weapon is the regular Golden Land you can attach with the Ash of War, which basically means that this weapon is trash. The bullet art from Golden Land scales exclusively to Faith, but because the Greatclaw doesn't scale to Faith, you can't increase the damage even if you invest into Faith. Furthermore, it isn't particularly long nor has a high AR. Next up is yet another disappointment, the Troll's Hammer. Since the base fire damage here is so low, the Faith doesn't do much. The Ash of War, Troll's Roar, has nothing to do with Faith either. No redeeming qualities on this one, but if you still want to use it because you like its looks, just toss your points into Strength. Dragon Greatclaw is a bit more interesting. Although this weapon has better strength scaling, the dexterity investment is actually better, because the dexterity scales both physical and lightning attack, while the strength portion only scales physical attack. Therefore, after the 30 base strength requirement, you actually want to toss points into dexterity. And then you want to invest into strength after 50 dexterity, making this a quality weapon. What makes this weapon stand out is that it is a hammer-type Colossal weapon that can fill a potential niche. With its relatively low weight and strength requirement, It is an option if you want your build to be more quality based without using one of the heavier options that all require higher strength. It is also longer than the axe options, and its element is lightning, which is the element players have the lowest defense of. I can see some very niche use case scenarios, but for the most part, nothing too impressive, especially if you're locked into Endure as a weapon art. Endure itself isn't bad, but you just don't have the option to mix things up. Watchdog's staff is finally a colossal weapon with a unique weapon art. The funny thing is this weapon art is a magic bullet type weapon art, while the weapon itself does not scale to intelligence. This means that investing into your intelligence stat will not increase the bullet art's damage. Therefore, the primary source of damage increase outside buffs is just the upgrade level of this weapon. As for AR maximization, it scales to strength better, but also leans towards a quality spread with some dexterity investment, even before reaching the strength soft cap for unique weapons. Ghiza's wheel is probably a weapon you recognize, even though you may not have used it yourself. This pizza cutter design is quite unique, and also the source of exploitable hard swap glitches. Despite needing more strength requirement, this weapon is completely quality based when it comes to AR maximization. You want to invest equally into strength and dexterity. With its unique spinning weapon Ash of War and the base bleed on the weapon, this weapon is actually fairly decent at applying bleed if you can find the opportunity to land its weapon art without getting interrupted. Next, I'm going to go over the Staff of the Avatar and the Rotten Staff together. Both weapons have the unique weapon art, Earth Tree Slam. They are indeed the same weapon art. However, the two weapons are actually fairly different. The Staff of the Avatar is actually a split physical and holy weapon with a faith requirement. On the other hand, the Rotten Staff does not have the faith requirement, and is not a split elemental weapon, but does have Scarlet Rot buildup. The difference is important, as the Earth Tree Slam has a faith scaling component. This means that, although their ARs are comparable, after factoring in the split damage nature of the Staff of the Avatar, it will do more damage on its weapon art because it scales to faith. On the other hand, the Rotten Staff applies Rot. Oh, and the Staff of the Avatar weighs 2 more than the Rotten Staff. Your pick. Fallingstar Beastjaw's unique weapon art, Gravity Bolt, used to do ridiculous amounts of poise damage for how easy it is to spam. It has been rectified last patch, but this weapon is still a suitably strong long-range option, as it tracks really well. It also gives strength users access to a Thunderbolt-like Ash of War, as Thunderbolt scales exclusively to dexterity. Granted, you have to not mind the 21.5 weight. As aforementioned, it is also by far the longest colossal weapon. The Envoy's Greathorn is a very heavy weapon art stick. The Great Oracular Bubble from its weapon art does indeed do quite a bit of damage if you invest into Faith. However, the Faith portion scales the attack rating really poorly, while you also need 28 strength, even though you know you're pretty much using this weapon for its weapon art. It really is in an awkward position, especially when the Longhorn typically serves better in PvE, as many bubbles can hit the same target and do more damage than one big bubble. It is also longer, lighter, and has less strength requirement. Finally, the last unique colossal weapon, the Axe of Godfrey. It has a unique weapon art, Regal Roar, which starts out with an unguardable shockwave, and also modifies your heavy attack. This is the normal heavy attack. And this is its heavy attack after the weapon art. Its attack rating also favors a slightly more quality distribution. For the most part though, I would say this is mainly just a cosplay weapon, as the weapon art is not particularly outstanding. Moving on to the regular weapons. we have the Duelist Great Axe, Rotten Great Axe, Golem's Halberd, Prelate's Infernal Crozier, and Giant Crusher, the heaviest weapon in game, weighing in at 26.5 weight. Starting with a heavy infusion, I've ordered the weapons according to their weight, which also conveniently separates them into the different types. The first obvious point is the Duelist Great Axe and Rotten Great Axe will follow similar patterns, where the Duelist has slightly more raw attack for the infusions, while the Rotten Great Axe gives Scarlet's Rot buildup. However, I really just recommend using the heavier Colossal weapons, like the Prelate's Infernal Crozier if you don't have enough stat points, and the Giant Crusher if you can afford the 60 strength in addition to the endurance cost. Notice that the strength I'm using is the first soft cap for heavy infusion, which does not meet the Giant Crusher's strength requirement of 60. If you don't know what I'm talking about, feel free to check out my soft cap video in the description down below. These are their stats for 80 strength. As for fire infusion, not particularly recommended unless the PvE enemy is weak to fire. Players by default will have more fire defense, so this infusion is not often used. Next comes Keen Infusion, and you can probably guess the kind of disaster you're about to see. With even the lowest strength requirements being 30, I don't really suggest using this. With 56 points into dexterity, you actually have higher AR on the two axes than 56 strength. However, do keep in mind that this Keen Infusion has 30 strength, while the heavy infusion I displayed only has 14 dexterity. That's 16 extra points to meet the requirement, and if you put those 16 points into strength, heavy will still come out on top. These are their stats at 80 dexterity, but I really suggest choosing another weapon type if you're trying to use something like a Keen Ash that scales your dexterity. The same goes for Lightning Infusion. Even though lightning is the strongest element in PvP due to players having naturally low lightning defense, the strength requirement makes this infusion undesirable. And there is pretty much no need to mention quality either, as it follows the same rule as all the other weapon classes. At meta PvP levels, this infusion costs too many skill points to produce a decent AR. Flame and Sacred also suffers from requiring too high of a strength investment. If you're trying to use incantations, I really suggest another weapon type. And since magic is just the intelligence version of Flame and Sacred, I also don't suggest this infusion. Code, on the other hand, is much better as it still retains strength as a good investment for its AR. In terms of AR, Giant Crusher is still crushing it. Next, for the Bleed Infusion, the first thing you'll notice is that it completely screws up the Rotten Great Axe's Scarlet's Rot, and also has a nerfed bleed. This is therefore not even an option to be considered. The two Great Axes also just have a low AR for the kind of weird stat distribution you have to do to maximize their AR. Neither are recommended for the bleed and poison status infusions. Next, while 45 bleed is the way to go for all arcane builds, 45 arcane would greatly skew the Giant Crusher's stat distribution, as you need 60 strength to wield it. I didn't want to give it a different treatment, so this is what you end up seeing. But if we do indeed have 60 strength and 45 arcane for all colossal weapons, you can see that it is indeed prudent to go for the Giant Crusher for maximization when you do have the stat points. Next, Poison Infusion is the same as Blood Infusion, except for the status effect. But unlike the Bleed Infusion, the poison exists peacefully with the Scarlet's Rot. Not like I would really choose the Rotten Great Axe for a status build anyway. With only 65 Scarlet Rot buildup and the Colossal Weapon's slow attack speed, it is quite slow compared to other weapons for applying Scarlet's Rot. As for the Occult Infusion, this is quite useless, as Arcane doesn't scale Scarlet's Rot. With the high strength investment required for Colossal Weapons, this infusion is definitely not recommended either. Alright, let's do a quick summary for the Colossal Weapons, starting with the unique ones. Great Club and Troll's Hammer, both of them have generic weapon arts, and nothing that stands out. They're relatively lighter than the infusible options, so I suppose you can use them earlier in the game, but not something you would use if you're optimizing. Dragon Greatclaw has some very niche use case I covered earlier. Otherwise, like the former two, it is also a generic weapon art, and nothing that really stands out. As for the Axe of Godfrey, you're going to be using this for its unique weapon art, that also changes your heavy attack. Mostly for cosplay purposes, I'm guessing, as the moveset itself isn't particularly powerful, nor is the AR outstanding. It also happens to be really short. The Staff of the Avatar and Rotten Staff have the same unique weapon art, but there is a difference. The Staff of the Avatar also has fate scaling, allowing you to scale your AoE and do more damage on your weapon art. The Rotten Staff, on the other hand, is easier to invest in as it only requires strength investment. It also applies Scarlet Rot while being 2 weights lighter than the Staff of the Avatar. The trade-off is, of course, you do less damage on your weapon art, which is a big reason you would pick one of these staffs. Next comes a bunch of colossal weapons that you choose mainly for their unique weapon art. These are all fairly unique. Although, I still have to mention that the Envoy's Greathorn, due to its stat distribution, has quite low AR for a split damage type weapon, and its weapon art isn't particularly powerful for how much stats you have to invest for carrying this weapon around. Another weapon I want to mention is the Fallingstar Beastjaw, which not only does pierce damage, but is also by far the longest colossal weapon. Even though its weapon art no longer deals absurd amounts of poise damage, it is still quite useful as a long-range option. Finally, for the infusible weapons, I don't suggest using the great axes. These feel really gimmicky, as the intention seems to be trying to allow you to scale to dexterity while on a colossal weapon. Unfortunately, the strength requirement is too high, and even after investing into dexterity, their AR isn't particularly great. I don't suggest using either of these weapons at all, as the following 3 weapons are all much better. The Golem's Halberd doesn't have as much attack as the Prelates nor the Giant Crusher, but it ties with the Ghiza's Wheel as the second longest colossal weapon. Seeing as how Fallingstar Beastjaw is extraordinarily long, I would say Golem's Halberd's length is already quite significant, even though it ranks second. If you're actually trying to PvP with colossal weapons, you can give this weapon a go if you find yourself missing too often with the shorter range Prelate's Infernal Crozier or the Giant Crusher. Both of these are hammer type colossal weapons, which means that they have higher base poise damage than the Golem's Halberd. They also have higher AR worth their weight, so you would use these for maximum damage. With enough stat points, the Giant Crusher is just a stronger Prelate's. Basically, if your build can reach 60 strength and not fat roll while using Giant Crusher, it is better than the Prelates unless you care about the different heavy attacks. Like and subscribe. Please buy my fantasy novel in the description down below to support the channel, which will also allow you to request a topic from me. See you next time.